All right, you guys, as you can see by the thumbnail, I'm back with another one like the other one. Not that one, but this one. So check it out, you guys. I got about 3 or 4 stories that I need to get out to you guys. You know, we've been bullshitting this last week. These stories, I actually wanted to get them out last week, but we got into some other stories. I got distracted, and these kind of went on the back burner. So I'm going to get straight into these right here. Now, this first story that I'm going to get into, it's about the fatal stabbing that took place in San Quentin between 2 death row inmates. So the stabbing was carried out under the orders of the Mexican mafia behind an act of insubordination, and it was also done to serve as a warning to the other Sureños on death row. Now, there's a lot of moving parts to this story, and in order for you guys to really understand what's involved, you guys need to hear the backstory first. And this might be one of those stories that I might have to break up into, different parts. We'll see. I'm just gonna run with it, and we'll see what happens as I go along. So the victim of the fatal stabbing was an individual by the name of Jonathan Fajardo, who went by Mono from 204th Street. He was fatally stabbed in East Block on Yard 1 by a fellow Sureño named Luis Rodriguez, who went by Soldier Boy from Paramount. Now, I'm going to get into the reasons why Mono was stabbed, the motivation behind it, and the hypocrisy of the politics. But in order for you guys to understand what those reasons were, you guys really need to understand everything else that was going on at that time. Now, something that needs to be understood off the rip is that death row politics are a lot different from, your level 4 politics. A lot of the politics that you guys hear about in a lot of these other stories, death row politics are a lot different, and I'm going to explain why. So for those of you that don't know or who haven't heard me talk about it before, I spent quite a few years housed on death row with death row inmates. I was housed in the Adjustment Center back in the early to mid 90s, and then I was housed in East Block at several points in between during the 90s all the way up to the early 2000s. I had personal relationships with a lot of individuals that I ran into over there. Individuals like Tookie, Stanley Williams, Little Fee, Taekwon Cox, Roscoe Paul Tuliepa, Little Ace, Keith Fudge, Left Hand Jarvis Masters, Bo Pete, John Lewis, Big Hurt, Dennis Brewer, to name a few. And then I met others who at that time were considered to be opposition. EME members and brothers Hector and Ronnie Ayala, Chato, Alfred Sandoval, Carlos Avina, Smokey, Freddie Pubiaba, Curtis Price, and Billy Ray Hamilton. There were others, but those are just a few to name. And then obviously in traffic, in passing traffic, just going to classification or on my way to the yard, I got to see a lot of the undesirables. Individuals like Richard Allen Davis, the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, Charles Ng, Marcus Wesson, Ramon Salcido, Rodrigo Paniagua, and on and on. So the dynamics of the politics on death row changed drastically around 2014, 2015, when Todd Ashker and Donnie Troxel, when they won that lawsuit, that class action lawsuit, that basically let everybody out of the SHU program, everybody that was validated, that had been stranded back there in the SHU for 20, 30, some cats up to 35 years in the SHU program, when they let everybody back out to the main lines, everybody that was validated under long-term solitary confinement, the sham validation process, this also impacted death row. All the validated death row inmates that had been slammed down in the adjustment center for just as long, 15, 20, 25, 30 years, all those guys that were validated, who had maybe they'd been to prison before they got put on death row, that were validated, when you get to San Quentin and you got the death penalty, the first place that you go to is the adjustment center. That's your first stop. So you get to the adjustment center, and that's when they classify you. So you're there for about 90 days. And then if you're validated, you're going to stay there in the adjustment center. If you're not validated, if you drop out or whatever your case might be, they're going to send you to East Block, which is death row's mainline. So the adjustment center is like death row's ADSEG or death row's SHU program, the whole. East Block is where you got all your privileges. It's the main line. It's where you get group yards, you get the phone. There's a lot of incentives and privileges that come along with being housed in East Block. That's why everybody that's on death row they want to be housed in the East Block. You get access at the phone. You get, a lot of canteen items. You get to go full draw. You get to have hobby and craft items in your cell. A lot of the times you'll see, they'll let them have musical instruments. I mean, there's a lot: jewelry, thermals, sweats, Walkmans, radios. Like, they can have a lot of stuff over there. When you're in the adjustment center, you're very limited on what you can have in your cell, your personal possessions. Your canteen is limited, and you don't get no access at the phone. You never get to use the phone, and your visits are behind glass. So there's a huge incentive. There's a lot to gain from wanting to be housed in East Block. And a lot of guys, when they get over there, they don't want to fuck that off. They want to stay there and take advantage of these privileges. You guys really need to understand that. This way, as I go into this story, you'll question why certain individuals might be over there, considering some of the circumstances that I'm going to get into. So if you're over there in East Block and you stab somebody, you catch an assault on staff, you assault another condemned death row inmate, or you violate some kind of major rule infraction, they'll roll you up and they'll ship you to the AC. And again, nobody wants to be in the adjustment center. It's slammed down. Like, they don't got nothing coming over there now. When I was going through the adjustment center in the early 90s, that was the spot to be, at least for ADSEG inmates like myself. They would house us over there if we had too much influence, if they thought we were shot callers, or if we had a history of being, assaultive. They would send us to the adjustment center. And that was the only place where you were able to go to the yard with actual death row inmates. You were able to go out there and be programmed on the yard with them. Not only be on the tiers with them, be housed on the tiers with them, but you would also go out to a group yard and you would program with them. All that changed over the years. I want to say towards the late 90s, early 2000s, they went into the adjustment center, and, the front of the cells over there used to be bars and mesh. So it was all kind of open. But then they went in, they tore all that down, and they put up solid doors. So now, when you're housed over there, you get that feeling as if like you're entombed. You're buried, you're in a dungeon. You can't really communicate on the tier with people because you can't hear nobody. You're behind the whole front of your cell is a solid steel, and then you got a solid steel door. So you're slammed down over there. And then when you go to the yard, you go to the dog kennels. There's no group yard over there. So you go to yard by yourself. If you get a visit, all your visits are behind glass. You don't get to make no phone calls. If you're in East Block, they have a phone that's on this roll cart. They'll push it right up to your door, and you're allowed to use the phones. But you don't get none of that in the adjustment center. So there's a lot of things that you don't get action at being in the adjustment center. That's why nobody wants to be housed over there. And just think about it. If you're over there in East Block and you got to put some work in, a lot of guys, they're like, they got to make a decision. Do I want to put this work in and fuck all this off and then go to the adjustment center and I'm slammed down? Or do I just let this shit ride and not put work in and, just kick back and take advantage of all these privileges that I got over here? That's a question that I'm sure some of you are going to ask yourselves as I go on in this story. So this is all one part of this story, understanding how, everything works over there in death row. Who's housed where, what's what kind of privileges you stand to lose if, you assault somebody and things like that. Now, I know that there's been a few stories that have been put out about Mexican mafia members on death row, namely Ronnie and Hector Ayala, and a Samoan EME member, all of whom I personally know. There's been several different versions on YouTube by several different channels, and those are their stories. I'm not discounting any of those versions, and I'm not fact-checking either way, because that's not what I do. I'm simply giving you guys my version and what was told to me by my source. So it's been long established that Ronnie and Hector Ayala, two brothers out of San Diego, two Mexican mafia members, are EME leaders, and that death row is basically their house. They're not above any of the other long-standing influential EME members that are housed throughout different state prisons. However, when it comes to death row, That's their house. So for the sake of understanding this story, let me just say that at some point, Ronnie Ayala and Smokey, the Samoan Mexican Mafia member, end up getting into a personal disagreement. They clash and start bumping heads, and this issue eventually becomes personal. So I'll get into the specifics of this conflict and what it all stems from in different parts of this story. So Smokey's a Mexican Mafia member with a tremendous amount of influence on death row, not only with the Sureños, but also with the other Mexican Mafia members on death row as well. Yeah, I know you guys can see Odie back there. He's liked by the majority of them because of how he carries himself. And he's somebody that's able to connect with a lot of the younger Sureños. But his influence is unofficial. In other words, there's a lot of Sureños on death row who like Smokey and who look up to him because he's known to be a stand-up guy. But Ronnie is a leader, and both him and his brother Hector are recognized as being the leaders of that house on death row. So this obviously puts Smokey at a huge disadvantage and in a situation where he wasn't likely to win. Ronnie and Hector have been Mexican Mafia members for almost 40 years, so it's pretty safe to assume that they're firmly established within that organization. Now, like I said, I'll double back and get into the issues of, what that conflict stems from, how it started, how it got personal, why it escalated. But once these issues escalated, it became personal, and Smokey was slowly ostracized. He wasn't placed on disregard. There's a big difference. But, eventually he was taken off the gallo, which is roll call. In the morning, they say, hey, buenos dias. They go on each tier, all the way down the tier, and include everybody that's active or everybody that's a part of that household, everybody that's embraced. A lot of the times they'll even put other cats that are not Sureños, but there's somebody that they embrace, and they'll include them in their gallo. But eventually he was taken off the gallo, and then it was filtered out that he wasn't a brother anymore. And eventually Ronnie sent a directive out telling all the active Sureños on death row not to acknowledge Smokey, and if they did, there would be serious consequences. Ronnie was doing everything he could to shut Smokey down, and for the most part, the majority of the Sureños did, and they didn't chance testing the waters. They knew that when Ronnie set his mind on something like this, he didn't fuck around. So nobody wanted to test the waters. Nobody wanted to be that example. But again, Smokey was a likable guy. There was a lot of Sureños that still respected him. So they still talked to him on the down low. In passing, they would still acknowledge him, or they would still send him literature or canteen or things like that on the down low. But it wasn't openly being done because there was a standing directive that warned anybody that got caught associating with them, interacting with them, communicating with them, that they would suffer serious consequences. So for the most part, nobody did. However, there was a few Sureños that looked up to Smokey. They looked up to him because that was their big homie. They admired him for being a Mexican Mafia member. According to my source, Mono respected Smokey. He admired Smokey. And when Smokey was on good standings or on good terms with Ronnie before it got personal, Smokey was lacing Mono up. He was educating him. He was giving him the game. So, he admired him. And a lot of Sureños felt bad that was happening to Smokey. Mono was one of them. He was one that put his neck out there a little bit more than some of the others. And eventually that would end up catching up with them. But, he would send them books, literature, and like I said, whenever he would pass them, and either on the way to the yard or to the law library or somewhere in the block, he would acknowledge him. But that's a huge mistake. That was a huge mistake, because a lot of the times there's others who are lurking in the shadows with agendas. They're either trying to earn brownie points, look good to leadership, or they just want to see you get burned because they don't like you. There's always others watching, and Mono's mistake was not taking this into consideration. He should have been a lot more low-key about it. And eventually he got too complacent to where, he started openly communicating with Smokey. As time went on, he got more comfortable. But whoever these other Sureños were, these individuals that seen Mono communicate with Smokey, whoever they were, eventually it ended up getting to Ronnie's ear. Somebody put it in Ronnie's ear that, hey, Mono's still fucking with this dude. He's still fucking with him. We seen him communicating with him. He was shooting lines to him, and he's still interacting with them, despite the fact that, you put that directive out there. So from what I was told, when Ronnie heard about it, he gave Mono some rope. He let him hang himself. He let him continue to associate with them. He let him continue to communicate with them. And Mono just got complacent. And one day he was on the tier fishing. He was on the tier fishing with Smokey and another Sureño. He seen it. He seen a line going back and forth between these two cells, and he burned him. He went straight to Ronnie and he put it in his ear again. Hey, this guy's on the tier. He's fishing with them. He's fucking with them. They're up there conversating all day like it's nobody's business. And Ronnie was livid. I'm sure at this point, Ronnie started to take this as if his authority was being undermined and that Mono was deliberately ignoring one of his directives, a directive that I'm sure he felt strongly about. So when this gets back to Ronnie, obviously it puts Mono in the crosshairs. Mono has now become a target. So now Ronnie got his mind pretty much made up. Mono's in the crosshairs. And, the wheels start getting put in motion to hit Mono, to have Mono hit. So it's at this point that they get a Soulja Boy from Paramount and they tell him that you're going to hit Mono. For Soulja Boy, this is a form of cleanup because he was also in hot water. Soulja Boy was constantly getting reprimanded for conduct unbecoming for the way he continuously acted on the tier. He had a real bad meth habit, and he would get so tweaked out that he would start doing dumb shit. He'd be in his cell, spazzing out, and it was starting to become a problem. It got to the point to where they felt like he was fronting off the casa and bringing on unwanted attention. Think about it. If there's a CO that walks by and sees someone foaming at the mouth or hiding under their bunk, sweating and making noises on the tier like a laughing hyena, then they're going to feel like they're being fronted off and they're going to start hitting cells. So hitting Mono was a form of cleanup for Soulja Boy. But even though Soulja Boy had issues with using dope, he wasn't no slouch. He was on death row for killing 3 people, and he didn't have a problem with dropping another body. So it was at that point that they started to put everything in motion to have Mono whacked on the yard. Mono was on 1 yard. He was on 1 yard with Soulja Boy. Ronnie and Hector Ayala are out there on 1 yard. So, they're already in the planning stages to have this guy whacked. So on the day that Soulja Boy was supposed to hit Mono, they made it easy for him. They had somebody fashion a piece, and they also had another Sureño that had a lot of influence. They had him bring that piece out to the yard so that it was basically hand delivered to Soulja Boy. And, I've seen it happen before. On death row, when you go to the yard, when you come out of your cell, they wind you down with a metal detector. And then, you got to go out to the yard. And when you get in front of the yard, they wind you again with the metal detector. If you got a bedroll, they wind that. So you got to go through some security. And a lot of times, if you can't bring a piece out yourself, a lot of the times, these guys will get assistance from COs that work there. You got to understand, a lot of these COs have been working on death row for some of them 15, 20 years, and they forge relationships with these guys. They get to know these guys on some level, and a lot of the times they respect them. They respect their get down. They respect the politics. So I've seen it happen where, a CO will grab a bedroll, will walk it all the way out to the yard, escorting this individual. And then when they get to the gate, hand them that bedroll. And that's where the piece is at. That's what happens. That's prison life. Those are prison politics. Those are things that happen in prison. So on the day that this incident happened, Mono went out to the yard and he ran his regular routine. He went out there and did all the things that he normally did out there on the yard. He went out there, he played a game of basketball, he shot a couple games of handball, he worked out, took a shower, and then he sat down to play a game of chess with, from my understanding, a chess partner that was his regular routine. They used to play chess out there for, half the yard. Half the yard, they would work out, kick back, do whatever they would do. And then for the rest of the yard, they would play chess. Meanwhile, as Mono was sitting down at one of the tables playing chess, Soulja Boy was getting himself pumped up and ready to hit Mono. He started walking a couple of laps and he started formulating a plan, in his mind of the best way to do it. And that's what you do. When you're going to whack somebody, you're looking at just the scenario that you have in front of you, where the gunner is, where the target's at, the best time to hit him. You know, should you come from the left? Should you come from the right? You know, should I walk by a couple of times, make sure that he's comfortable before, you know, just coming through on the first round. These are different things that, you know, when you're getting ready to move on somebody, you're planning these things out in your mind. You're always going to try to, you know, get a step up or one up on the element of surprise, you know, catching somebody off guard. If possible, it's always, you know, your objective is always to get away, to see where the gunner's at, you know, maybe do it while the gunner's distracted. These are all things that you're trying to get to your advantage. So I'm sure that's what Soulja Boy was doing. Meanwhile, he's looking at Mono and he's pumping himself up. So he starts walking laps and he's got a nasty piece. So the piece that Soulja Boy had, it was a steel rod. It was like the size of a husky pencil. That's how thick it was. It was around 7 inches long and it had a handle on it. It was a nasty piece. It was the kind of piece that you look at and you say, damn, that's a nasty motherfucker. Whoever gets hit with that, you know, they're going to get the business. You guys should be seeing what that piece looks like. So again, when Soulja Boy felt like it was go time, he started walking laps. You know, he wanted to walk by Mono at least once or twice, so that, you know, Mono would probably look up at him the first time, maybe the second time he look up at him, and then, you know, the third, fourth time that he came around, he'd probably just ignore him and start playing chess. You're out there on the yard and there's movement out the side, you know, your peripheral, you see things move, you're always going to look, you know, but when there's somebody walking laps, I can just imagine it as it went down. That's probably what happened, something along those lines. Yeah, I know there's probably some of you that are like, B, you don't know what the fuck you talking about, but I kind of do. So Soulja Boy walked 2 or 3 laps. He made sure that Mono was comfortable with him passing, and then he took off. What happened next was fast, and it happened with precision. It was either luck or Soulja Boy knew what he was doing, because the first time he hit Mono was in the back of the neck, and it severed his spinal cord instantly. I don't know what happened at that point. I don't know if Mono stood up or if he fell over, but the second hit was in the chest, and that was also a fatal wound. Either one of those 2 wounds were fatal. Mono was probably dead before he hit the ground. And if he wasn't, he probably died a couple of minutes later. I've been out there on those death row yards when somebody gets hit. And trust me, it's not like they see somebody bleeding out that they're going to pop the gate open, go up in there, grab that individual, and take them off the yard. Nah, they take extra precaution with death row inmates. A lot of the times, they'll clear the whole yard. They'll have everybody come up one at a time while this individual's laying there bleeding out, and they'll cuff them up and run the next guy in, cuff them up until they clear the yard. Then they'll go in and they'll get the body. By this time, that's exactly what they're going to retrieve, a body. This individual has already bled out. But here's a few twists to this story that you guys need to understand. One is that Mono had been there on death row for a couple of years. He had been out there on the yard for a few years, and he had been programming, and he was on an active death row yard. And there's no question about the fact that he died to serve as an example to any other Sureño who might also make the mistake of defying Ronnie's authority. That's without question, as others would later be warned. They would be warned with the phrase that would become a common phrase amongst the Sureños. Make the mistake of defying a directive coming from Ronnie and you'll get the Mono treatment. The Mono treatment. That's what they referred to as the Mono treatment. But whether or not there was a general consensus with those who agreed or whether they disagreed with what happened to Mono, whether they agreed or disagreed, one thing was for sure. There were a lot of Sureños that believed that Mono should have been hit, that it shouldn't have took this long to hit Mono, and it shouldn't have been, you know, for defying Ronnie's directive. He should have been hit based on the circumstances of his case. Mono was convicted of killing a 14-year-old black girl, which was described as being a racially motivated murder. She was a child. Anywhere else on any level 4 main line, and Mono would have got blasted as soon as he touched the yard. That's a promise. I can guarantee you that. If Mono would have hit one of those level 4 yards and he would have showed his paperwork to somebody and they would have seen that he's there for killing a 14-year-old child, trust me, he wouldn't even have had a chance to unpack his shit. They would have whacked him, like they would have put those wheels in motion ASAP. As I said earlier, death row politics are different from other politics that happen on level 4 main lines. The politics that happen on death row are different because you're dealing with different kinds of individuals. There's different kinds of people on death row. Everybody knows that. It's common knowledge that, you know, a lot of these guys on death row are there for some heinous cases. You know, the kind of cases that if you were to sit down and read the circumstances and the details of some of their cases, it would shock your conscience. But let me make it clear, not everyone on death row is a rapist, a child killer, or, you know, a weirdo. There's gang members that are on death row, a lot of them, a lot of gang members that are on death row for committing gang-related homicides. So, you know, make no mistake about it. Everybody that's on death row doesn't have one of those sick crimes, but there's a lot of dudes on death row that do. But here's the thing. When I went through death row, whether it was the AC or East Block back in the 90s, they had all those kind of dudes separated. They had them all on 1 yard. It was I believe it was the 4 yard. So you had 6 yards back there, but eventually the 5 yard and the 6 yard, those 2 yards will go away. Those were the two ad seg yards. So they started to use the 5 yard for, I want to say they were dropout sureños. And then the 6 yard, they used it for some other cats, but they weren't active yards. The active yards were 1, 2, and 3 yards. I know those 3 were active. But my point is back in those days, they kept the weirdos segregated. They kept them segregated because they knew they were targets. And if they put them out on any one of those yards, they get mollywopped straight up. Soon as they put them out there, they get bing, bing, bop, bing, boop, bing, bop, boop, bing, oh, shoot, bing, bop. They would have tore their asses up if they would have put them out there. But they're not doing that no more. They're not doing that anymore. And this is where the hypocrisy comes into play. Yard 1 is considered an active Sureño yard. Yard 2 is considered an active Mexican Mafia / Sureño yard. Yard 3 is considered an active NF yard. But when you look at who's out there on these yards, it has to make people wonder how politics are being honored. Look at all the individuals that are out there, and you ask yourself, how is this even possible? Again, it's widely known that death row inmates want to stay in East Block because that's where they get to take advantage of all their incentives and privileges. There's dope, cell phones, and other things that are obviously a strong motivation to stay there. Nobody wants to get rolled up and go back to the adjustment center, and this is understandable. But you don't get to use that excuse when you're active. Obligations don't get thrown wayside unless the rules have changed. I mean, let me make it clear. This story is not to put anyone in a negative light or slander anyone. But when you're talking about hypocrisy, these things need to be brought to light. Bottom line, the powers that be, they don't have no problem pushing a hard line and eating their own over things like drugs, money, personal conflicts, and insubordination. I guarantee you that 90% of the stabbings that happen out there on those yards are in-house. They're stabbings that are being done on their own people. But then they're out there walking around programming with individuals like the ones that you guys just seen. That don't make no sense. Matter of fact, even Soulja Boy ended up learning this himself. After he killed Mono, they tried to kill Soulja Boy because apparently Soulja Boy couldn't leave the meth alone. He kept getting loaded. He kept acting like a J-Cat on the tier. He kept on fronting everybody off. And eventually they were like, you know what? Enough's enough. He's blowing up the spot. He's got to go. I mean, he had, from what I understand, he used to tweet hard. They were saying that he was doing some way out shit. Being in the cell, butt-ass naked, dancing around, just straight tweaking. And I mean, that's cool. You know, with all due respect to Soulja Boy, he's allowed to do that in his cell. That's his cell. But, you know, the fellas, they didn't like it. So eventually they tried to kill Soulja Boy on the yard. He ended up checking in. So he's no good no more. You know, there's a lot of guys on death row that are not happy with some of the politics that are happening out there right now. Their hands are tied because they're being told not to take off on certain individuals. You know, there's people out there with funny charges, but they're being told to stand down. Why? Because people don't want to go back to death row. Why? Because there's a lot of individuals that don't want to go back to the adjustment center. They love all these privileges that they're getting right now. They love the fact that they can go out there in the visiting room and have, contact visits with their family. They love the fact that they're in East Block where they have access at getting cell phones, access at getting drugs. There's a lot of canteen items that they can buy over there. I mean, there's a lot of privileges that come with being over there in East Block. But making sacrifices is part of the game. And there's a lot of Sureños over there that I've talked to that are not happy with what's going on over there. I mean, here's one example of an individual by the name of Antonio Tony Boy Rodriguez. There's Sureños that have told me, like, how can you kill Mono or go after Soldier Boy when you're embracing this individual, Tony Boy? Tony Boy is from San Fernando, and he's on Walk Alone. He is on Walk Alone, but he's on the Gallo. They say buenos dias to Tony Boy. And when they do their rutina, they do their workout, guess who's working out in the cage with everybody else? When they go down and do their burpees, guess who's going down doing their burpees? Tony Boy. So it looks like he's still active, on some level. He's still being embraced on some level. The fact that this individual is even getting acknowledged bothers a lot of people over there. And this is not coming from me. I don't know this individual. This is coming from a lot of those guys that are over there on death row. They're like, this individual, Tony Boy, he shouldn't be acknowledged on no level, especially if, you're somebody that has kids. Think about it. But that's just one example. I'm not talking to just one individual in particular. I'm not talking to one individual. I'm not just talking to one criminal organization. I'm talking to all criminal organizations. This is the hypocrisy that's happening across the board. Like I told you guys, I'm going to double back and I'm going to break up this story into several different parts and go deeper into the issues involving Smokey, only because there's several different versions out there that have been floated, versions that are not true. And you got to understand that there's a lot of false propaganda that's being put out there right now. It's not on the individuals that are telling the stories. This false propaganda is being generated from individuals on death row. There's agendas that, are causing these individuals to put this propaganda out there because it serves some type of purpose. You put this out there, you say this about this individual, and, these are the effects. You put this out there, you start this rumor, and this is what's going to happen as a result to that. So those are the ones that are putting out false propaganda. I'm not talking about the people that are being given the stories and that are putting these stories out there. It's the propaganda in the stories that's being generated from people on death row. And some of these individuals that are putting this propaganda out there are individuals who have something that they want to keep hidden. There's some kind of agenda where they're trying to distract you or deflect something. So I'm going to go deeper into it. Give me like another week or a couple more days before I come out with the second version, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. There was even a rumor out there that there was an attempt to take out EME leadership by putting poison in carga that was being ingested. This simply isn't true. And this was a rumor that, again, was being generated by someone on death row themselves. I'm going to wrap this part of the story up right here, but I'll follow up on the next part of this soon. Again, the purpose for sharing this story with you guys is to just shed light on the hypocrisy and the double standards that exist on death row. The process of taking any life for any reason is wrong. One doesn't justify the other. But the entire political landscape of CDCR is changing. The S and Ys are being shut down and merged with yards that are being called non-designated. The same sentiment exists on some of the level 4s out there on the main lines as well. Guys that spent 30 and 40 years stranded in the shoe don't want to go back because they don't want to lose the privileges that they have out there now. They don't want to go back to the shoe programs, cell phones, dope, contact visits, et cetera, et cetera. Are politics changing? Are self-interest and personal gain being placed before morals and obligation? You guys be the judge. Let me know what you think in the comments. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this story. I got 2 more I'm going to try to put out right now. I might even try to get out another Inner Demon. And like I said, we're going to start doing lives again. That's something that we kind of got away from, but there's a lot of viewers that have been asking about lives. So we're going to start tapping in again, doing lives with you guys. Anyways, I hope you guys are being safe out there. I hope you guys are keeping it positive. With that said, this your boy B, and I'm out.